this month, or I guess it'd be last month, Argentina hit single digit inflation. And so that's a really big deal for a lot of reasons, because Argentina has been in the 100% inflation. And this article here says at one point they were projecting going into this year that they were going to hit 211% inflation,
Oof.
which is
That is wild.
pretty wild. And the reason this is important to us as entrepreneurs, specifically here in the United States, is Argentina has a very similar governmental structure to the United States. And they also have a very similar structure from a commodity standpoint, from farming, farmland, shale. They can pretty much be independent. And they're actually shaping up, as the United States kind of removes itself from the greater global economy, to become a bit of a force. I don't know if they'll ever be a superpower, but a bit of a force to be reckoned with, because they can pretty much take care of themselves and be independent. And they'll probably end up being a net producer of oil and gas and other commodities and whatnot. But the lesson is, one, it could always be worse, right? So we're experiencing, inflation. And that is determined a couple different ways. And I think there's different arguments about how bad it actually is. But it ain't 200%. The poverty line, about 40% of the nation in Argentina was in poverty, and that was approaching 60%. And they're still kind of battling that. And with that much inflation, you're devaluing the peso, which is what they use, pretty tremendously. So we've talked about it in previous, what's going on here, devaluation of the dollar. We're still one of the best houses in a bad neighborhood, right? So it can always be worse. But I think the bigger lesson is, how did they go from 25% monthly inflation to 8.8% inflation? And it comes down to simply one thing. They just went through and they started slashing all of the government funded projects. And so we talked about it on this pod a while ago. We're printing $1 trillion a quarter. We just passed the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. And as we went through that list on this podcast, we saw that the vast majority of those outside of the military were these government programs that don't produce any income. They don't make any money. And so therefore we're just floating the bill for all this government crap effectively, which to me, there are needs for some social programs, but the amount that were in that infrastructure bill were out of control.
That was mostly research.
Correct. Research and just unnecessary programs, right? And so how do we fix a lot of the problem that we've had today? I think that's been a big question, which is, how do we fix it?
Yeah.
And people are talking about the dollar, but we're not going down to the root and saying, what are the government funded programs that are just completely unnecessary? Which ones are actually necessary? Just like you would do in your own life or your own business. If you hit a point where you were accruing a bunch of debt, you'd have to restructure. We need to go through and we just need to clip the dead weight, right?
Right.
So here's a little post from Argentina. It's from Instagram about Argentina. It's called Students for Liberty. And it says, Argentina, April inflation drops to single digits for the first time since October. Monthly inflation rate has fallen to 8.8%. This marks the first occurrence of a single digit rate since last October. The chainsaw is working, right? So the president, government, I think you say his name's Milei.
Yeah.
He took office in December 10th, 2023. So December 10th, 2023, it was 25.5%. January was 20.6%. February, 13.2%. March, 11%. April, 8.8%. And it's just the chainsaw, meaning they're going through and just cutting all this government program. They're not out of the woods. They still definitely have a lot of work to do in order to shore up the rest of the country. But man, that's a good start and a good lesson for us. And then when the question becomes, what can we do? How do we actually fix this? It's not continually manipulating interest rates.
Right.
It's going in, not with a scalpel, but with a chainsaw and cutting it out.
Okay. So let me ask you a question. When it comes to running the chainsaw to our own government programs, I think to some degree we've kind of been conditioned to the existence and expansion of these things. Right.
Right.
And so someone who has a soft spot for people who are disadvantaged, or, have disabilities and various different things, significant circumstances that do require that, they'll feel a certain type of way about that. And you obviously put that caveat, like there are certain things. But when you think about the government cutting spending on these programs, I guess my question to you would be like, what takes its place in the free market? But like, what do we do? Because I think that's the part we never talk about, is that people still can help.
Right.
It just doesn't have to be your government writing checks. And so,
well, I mean, the whole point of nonprofits, right? Those are set up with tax structures in a way that are supportive of that. I think it's just too big of a question that I don't really have an answer for, that I would need to spend time. But I think if we actually audited all of the different programs that we're funding, and we actually said, okay, hey, here's what's necessary. Here's what's a need. Here's what's a want. And then the rest of that can be left to the free market to go fix.
Yeah. And that's ultimately what I was trying to get at too, is that sometimes we think that the government is the only one that solves that problem, when it's like, look around you. Who built the world around you, And it's like,
well, the tax structure is set up in a way to support people who go and do these things, right? Create jobs, provide housing, so on and so forth. So there's 5,800 pages in the tax code. You guys have heard me talk about this before. Only 30 of them are dedicated to actually paying taxes.
Right.
So the rest of those are designed to help you in a capitalistic society use the tax code to your advantage in order to do that. The problem is once you put the hand out, then the next hand comes out. 100%. There has to be some sort of regulation. And I would even go as far to say that we need to have a greater criteria for who gets the money, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Just because you won the bid the first time doesn't mean you should get it the second time.
Right. 100%. And along the lines of what I was talking about is like this, when you if government cuts spending, these social programs, the wonderful thing about someone else stepping in from the market is that they had to work to be able to do that.
Right.
And that's a key piece that we just lose sight of this in the discussion. I think in particular, millennials and Gen Z, we're really losing sight of that in this discussion of like, if the government is just stepping in and doing it, they didn't work to do that. So it's not actually real. It's not tangible. It's not actually beneficial to you.
Well, it's a zero-sum game, because long-term, it just exacerbates all the problems that you're trying to solve, right? So if somebody's disadvantaged, we continue to inflate the dollar, and things become more expensive.
They're further disadvantaged.
You're chasing your tail, right? Because you can never really close that gap. There's no way to help that person actually get back on their feet, right?
Correct.
And so I'm not saying we should do away with it, but I think there's an alternative method that's somewhere in the middle of those two that's probably a better solution. And that was the point of that, is it's just interesting to see under that new leadership, they've come in and just taken a chainsaw to it.
The chainsaw. We need a chainsaw effect on Keelan. Yeah. Shout out to Argentina, man. Single digits. Let's go. 200% to 8% potentially. Anyways, shout out to them.